G'day folks, welcome back to GOAT Fantasy. Season 2026 is underway. GOAT Fantasy, as always, brought to you by checkmyrate.au. Visit the website, it's free to use, take control of your financial future. Nice to be with you again for a new season, the second season of GOAT Fantasy. So much support from all of you during the first season, 2025, over 50,000 downloads, and I couldn't be more excited to be back for another season. There's been plenty going on in recent times. I'm a father now, little Max, 4.5 months old. We visited Perth, met some of the family. There's been cricket and plenty going on at work, but really excited to get my teeth stuck into fantasy footy again. And just to whet the appetite, participated in the way too early draft for the AFL Fantasy Record with the DT Talk boys, amongst others. Really enjoyed that. And you'll see all the results of that in the record as it comes to hand and is published over the next little while. But I just thought we'd just start off with, the real bread and butter of GOAT Fantasy, which is going out to a club, assessing what we see on the training track, speaking to people at the footy club, and just giving you a bit of feedback on what's going on. So we're going to start with Essendon because Kyle Langford spoke today and we were invited down to training to have a look at everything going on. To be honest, it was quite a light session, but I was able to speak to a few people at the club. So I'm just going to go through a bunch of players, just dump some information on you when it comes to the Bombers. And then there's a couple of questions from listeners, which I appreciate, which we'll get to at the end as well. I've got a nice little nugget for you to come a little bit later. So we'll start at the very top. Andy McGrath, new skipper. And I think there was a little bit of hope that potentially he would play some midfield this season because he did the latter part of last year. If he was able to play midfield, potentially he would be really good value as a defender. But he is back in the back line for this season. Has been some talk that perhaps he'll be a little less locked down, a little more rebounding. I think that's just something we have to assess once we start seeing competitive games in the preseason. Perhaps, the match sim will give us a little bit of an opportunity to assess how he's going, but there might be a little captaincy bump for him as well. So one to watch, Andy McGrath, certainly in draft. Jacob Farrow has made a really good impression, the young West Australian. So he's available as a defender in fantasy. All reports that he's started his AFL life really well and getting involved in transition ball movement, which is a great sign with +6s. Maybe he does have a bit of fantasy game about him. So, as a defender, if he looks promising, he could be one that's going to be on our team sheets. So Darcy Parish is one that I think we're all sort of looking at his name at this sort of mid-price midfielder who's averaged over 100 before, has been just debilitated by injuries in recent years. And speaking to people at Essendon, it almost felt like they wanted to say he's had an outstanding preseason, he's absolutely flying, but they don't want to jinx it because, this time last year he was also going really well and then he hurt, he got a soft tissue injury and then it just dragged on for the entire year. So as it stands, Darcy Parish is someone we should be considering as a mid-pricer. We haven't even got to games yet. But so far, so good for Darcy Parish. His body holding together with new head of high performance, Matty Innes, at Essendon. Same goes for Langford, who went to Qatar to sort out his soft tissue hamstring and quad last year. He'll play that hybrid forward role, a nice flyer in draft in deep leagues. Elijah Sardis, I think we can all move on from him. Good luck to him. I hope he has a good career, but I won't be taking the risk on him. Jai Caldwell, all I was thinking today when I was watching him train was, absolute specimen, great tan, he's in great condition. And as Essendon fans will tell you, and the believers of Caldwell in fantasy, is that when he gets plus 60% CBAs, he scores really high. I think he averaged about 120 last year when he was given the opportunity in the midfield. So it could potentially be his breakout season if he can stay fit. Certainly he's going to be sort of first picked in that midfield for Essendon. And then the Zach Merritt of it all. This is such an interesting discussion topic for the Bombers. Relinquishes the captaincy after requesting the trade to Hawthorn. Still 2 years left on the contract. Has to come back to the club. And then that first day back, he was just lagging in the 2 game time trial. And I'll to be honest, I sort of was looking at him and wondering, is he a little bit behind with his training? The club said to me today, it's just that he just isn't that good at 2K time trials. He's actually dropped a couple of kgs, so he is in good condition. Of course, it's in their best interest to say that and that he's flying. But would anyone be surprised if he just came out and just had another massive year because he is such a pro and that's just the kind of person that he is? And he's putting himself in the shop window for potentially going back to the well with Hawthorn at the end of the season. So wouldn't be surprised if it's another year averaging 100 for Zach Merritt if he gets the midfield minutes. Of course, Braden Fiorini, much loved sort of cult fantasy figure, has come in and really impressed everyone at Essendon. He'll just lock down a wing spot and average 85, 90, you would think, for the coming season. Sullivan Roby, so some hot spots in his back, which Essendon didn't know about until he'd been drafted. So they've just really eased him in the pre-season. He's a big boy, and I think, understandably, everyone at the club has really high hopes for him, but it's just been a slightly slower start to his AFL career. So, I think temper expectations early in the season. Everyone is saying that Isaac Kako has had an amazing pre-season. Not really fantasy relevant for us, but nice to hear. Jordan Ridley, really slow build after a terrible season with injury last year. With a new regime and perhaps a new approach to his training loads, maybe we might see him on the park more consistently, maybe. And that would mean, he'll be a really valuable player in draft. I don't think you can risk it in the salary cap formats. Dyson Sharp, I think we all know that he'll be in our first picked sides and probably on field. He's going to get midfield minutes. He's a ready-made player. I said to my camo who I was working with today, can you get shots of this young fella? And he said, this guy doesn't look like a young fella. He looks like a man. Like he does not look like a first-year draftee. That is for sure. I'm sure he's going to have a really solid year. The question for Sharp is more, it's not about whether he's good enough to play AFL. It's just how much he can improve from his current level. Perkins is coming back from injury, so you don't have to worry about him. Vicentini, I think, is behind Blackiston right now for that number one ruck role, but he's still got a lot of developing to do. There's Peter Wright has been talked about a little bit. Can he in draft, do a bit stuff forward and then a bit in the ruck? Does score well when he plays on ball, so he might end up being a handy sort of waiver wire streamer early in the season. Lots of buzz about Archie Roberts. Could he fill the Nick Martin role, who unfortunately is out for the entire season? He's certainly showed he's got fantasy game, and I love him as a draft guy. To me, it sort of feels like he's got a pretty high floor, the way that he plays. And if Essendon continue to play a high possession game, then he'll just continue to rack up the footy. They love him, understandably. Durham will just continue to average 85. Nick Bryan, I like in draft, is set for a return. They said to me, I think, sort of 4, 5, 6, that sort of range after the ACL, which he did at Gather Round last year, as a bench ruck, or, you draft him and then you just sort of fill holes until he comes back. But I think he's going to have a good year. I've always liked him. Jackson Pryor has been training on a wing. Not even sure he's in the best 23 this season, but a solid contributor when he is in the side, not from a fantasy perspective. Red Dog has had a big preseason. He came back early. Reliable senior player leader. He'll be a great sort of D2, D3 for you. Haven't heard much about Zach Johnson through the preseason. I was really hoping that someone was going to say, he's flying, he's taken another step because he's got fantasy game. But haven't heard much about Zach Johnson. So wait to see if he can take a leap in his second season. And then Lockie Blackiston, the last one on the list. So I mentioned that Vicentini probably behind Blackiston. So he's going to get a chance, you would think, early in the season as a ruckman. Mid-season draftee from East Fremantle. So he's had a bit more time to get acclimatised to AFL life. And maybe we see a step forward from him. But he's not going to be a long-term play. All right, so there's your Essendon roundup. I tried to get through that as quickly as possible for you. So just floated out any comments, questions, anything from the listeners and those who follow Goat Fantasy on Twitter. So Mitch Casey, Ball Boys, Mitch. Good to hear from you, mate. He says, any insights for general team game style changes? So I have not got to a point where I've been around to every club and I've been able to watch them train. So I can't answer that right now. I've read training notes at Essendon that say supposedly they're trying to move the ball quicker. I'm not sure we can make any really, big statements on this until we've seen, proper games. So, for instance, in the next couple of weeks, I think these sort of scratch matches and proper intra-clubs get underway. I think that's when we'll get a better sense for that. But I think that trend of looking at game style and, the total points available and market share, I think is something that's absolutely worthwhile. And, Essendon in particular, I feel to me like a club that's really relevant. Are they going to be chipping it around the back line again because we want those points to be available? So Taser says, reclaim some clubs may use 5 interchange as a pseudo sub. What have you heard from various clubs? I think the consensus that I've heard is that it's an opportunity to play, whoever the sub would have been, just a bit more advanced game time throughout the game, but not necessarily, up to 80%. So it might be sort of a 50, 60% time on ground role, or it just gives clubs that opportunity to play 2 rucks, the second big man option, whereas otherwise they would have just said, we'll just give our main guy, 85% and then just find a chop out. So they're the 2 things that I've heard. I'm not so sure about the pseudo sub. I think that was reported by Cal Toomey. He obviously has some insight on that. Tony Whitfield, any insight on the midfield makeup at the Hawks with Warple, Gawn and Day injured, who are the main 3-4-5 rotating through. So Newcombe, Ward, Nash, and then Mackenzie, McDonald, bit of Dylan Moore and or Nick Watson, and then Henry Huswaite, I guess, is the extra one. I think just last season, the issue with Huswaite was he got subbed a couple of times after starting the game because they felt like they were lacking pace. I'm not sure if Sam Mitchell is going to change his mind on Huswaite too much. I'm surprised that he's still at the club. So, yeah, the likelihood for me is that they're only going to play Huswaite if they don't have their other slow guys in there, and then they, to be honest, on paper look a bit one-paced. So the name I guess people have been talking about a lot is Connor McDonald. Played as a midfielder when he was younger, has really excelled in that sort of high half-forward role. Is this the time for him to step up and become a midfielder? Has been training with the midfield. So he's the one to watch in the forward line. And then can Cam Mackenzie take that next step that we've been waiting for it feels like a couple of years now. But yeah, very interesting time at the Hawks. The Carlton Blues, Florence role at the Blues, and who will be the 2 starting wings. Not sure about the wings. I know the Camporellis have both had really solid pre-seasons to date. Whether one or both of them could hold down wings. I don't know if Akers is a first choice wingman for Michael Voss anymore. Could Ollie Hollands be sent back out there? I don't know. So Florence role, when I watched their match sim, was a distributing halfback. They were conscious to get the ball through his hands quite a lot. And when we asked him about his role, he said he was sort of open to whatever. But that looks like the early slot that he's been put in. Mason, Sam Berry, does he get enough CBAs to present value with Crouch, Gawn and Rankin dropping off in CBAs at the end of last year? Berry definitely had a good second half of the season. I thought maybe his cards had been stamped under Matthew Nicks, but just earned a spot back in the lineup. Whether they go younger with Sid Draper, they try and get a bit more pace through there, who knows? Maybe the last spot on your draft team. I don't know if I've been taking the risk in salary cap on Berry. Brisbane Bloods fantasy with rucks projected to have lower averages with the new rules. What position do you project will get the scoring benefit? Well, depends how teams want to play, right? Like if you're getting that last touch free kick, do you use the short kick backwards? Do you do that little 45 into the corridor, or do you just wheel onto your right foot and just bang it down the line, trying to get the ball forward as quickly as possible? Like, there are a few options there. Like if I'm imagining what Brisbane do, I could see Jasper Fletcher kicking it to Zorko, kicking it to Harris Andrews, giving it to Kitty Coleman, and then they build up their attack from there. Whereas I could see West Coast, like Harley Reid, just grabbing it and just, wheeling out to his right foot and just pumping it down the line for Cooper Duff Tyler to fly at. So just depends on what team it is. But it just presents the opportunity for more plus sixes and less, obviously, chances for ruckman to get hitouts and tackles. Digby, Melbourne defence, CJ, Salem and Windsor. To be honest, I don't mind all three of those. If Salem gets kick-ins, then he could potentially have a massive year because traditionally he hasn't got a huge amount of free points in the back line. It's sort of been Stephen May who's had a large percentage of those, or Jake Bowie, and it's possible that May won't be in the team and Bowie's out injured. So Salem could get a nice boost. Windsor, I like his style off half-back, but his disposal is still an issue, so he may not be the half-back who's going to be racking up massive numbers and maybe more of an impact player running with ball in hand. And then CJ, so difficult to predict. He's had a good preseason, but injury history is long. And Sam Cullen asked about Changwath Jath as well. So yeah, I think he's a watch. If he performs well during the preseason, he's a guy that we could look at, but there is risk attached to Jath, as we know. Putty's Pigs, thoughts on George Wardlaw? I absolutely love him as a player. He goes so hard. Sometimes I watch him play and think, geez, this guy could be anything, but he has been injury prone. Doesn't seem to me to be a high accumulator, more of an impact player, so I'm not sure he's ever going to be an amazing fantasy player, perhaps better in Supercoach, but we just haven't seen him string together yet. So if this is the breakout year and he stays fit, I've got him in a dynasty league, so I'm as hopeful as anyone that he can take things to the next level, but we just need to see it. And then Sam Cullen also asks thoughts on Kitty Coleman. This is a little nugget that I said was buried right at the end of the podcast. We're nearly at 20 minutes, so hopefully you're still listening. Kitty Coleman, I am told he's looking really good and moving very well. Potentially the fittest he has looked. So he's had 2 seasons ruined by injury. He is cheap and available, on every format, and really is a must-have. If he rolls out in opening round and gets plenty of the pill, he's going to be an amazing, cheap cash maker, point accumulator. Like, he's going to be big for us this year. So right now, as it stands, Kitty Coleman in great nick and looking good. Fantasy Fanatic, Steele's role at Melbourne, hopefully a solid mid. Yeah, he'll play in the midfield, absolutely. And I wouldn't be shocked if he has a slight renaissance, but a lot depends on his fitness, and then if Stephen King is willing to just let Jack Steele be Jack Steele, lay tackles, attend heaps of centre bounces, or heaps of CBAs, whatever we call them now, even though we don't bounce it, but around the footy, tackles, get possessions, pressure. If he is being himself and Melbourne allow him to do that, then he'll have a great year. He'll average, over 100 most likely. But I personally won't be going there. I watched him pretty closely last season because I had him in draft and I didn't like what I saw, but he did get phased out at St Kilda in the second half of the season. No doubt about that. All right, we've hit just about the 20-minute mark. I think not a bad start for Goat Fantasy. Hope you've enjoyed the episode. Please invest in our content and in this concept. So share it with friends, get everyone on board. We developed a nice little community last season. I want that to grow, each week, each year. So the content will be ramping up over the next few weeks as we lead into the season. But yeah, just enjoy this time where we're not in season. There's no stress. This is the fun part, is picking your teams, tinkering, thinking about those players who you think can take the next level. Appreciate your time on Goat Fantasy. So much to come this season. Nice start, and we'll catch up soon.